Reality Podcast, a podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Are you curious, what does it take to actually build a profitable and environmentally conscious company? Well, on today's podcast, I have Jon Hale. He is a Ph.D. CFA director of the ESG strategy, primarily known as Sustainable Social Governance for Investment. Jon Hale focuses on ESG thought leadership and product strategy for Morningstar. Prior to 2021, Jon was the Morningstar's head of sustainable investing research, and he directed the company's research initiatives on sustainable investing, beginning with the launch of Morningstar Sustainability Rating for funds in 2016. In 2018, Jon Hale was named Barron's list of the 20 most influential people in the ESG investing, and in 2019, he was included in the Investment News 10 Leaders of ESG Impact Investing. Without any delay, I'd like to welcome Jon. Hey, welcome, Jon.
Hey, nice to be here.
Excited to wrap with you. I know, a lot of things that we're trying to do in this day and age is to try to find a balance between, the environment and our perpetual side for growth and business and economy. And I think this is something that's kind of the need of the times right now. And I'm really excited to kind of talk to you and just really find out a little bit about your journey that got you into this whole area of, sustainable impact investing.
Yeah, well, it's been a bit of a long, strange trip for me, I guess. It started out when I first left academia for Morningstar in the 1990s, actually, and what we called at that time socially responsible investing was kind of a niche activity. Not everybody was that clued into it or even wanted to practice it. But it was appealing to me because even at that early date, there was, it was really about investors saying, it's not enough for us to just invest for the sake of, sort of maximizing our profit or getting everything we can, get for our investment accounts as investors, but we're also concerned about things like how our investments affect the people and planet. And so at the time, it was it was sort of a small thing, socially responsible investing, partly because data and the information wasn't there to fully evaluate investments based on what today we call ESG criteria. Often environmental stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria. So at that time, it was mainly about excluding certain things that maybe you just didn't want to make money from in your portfolio. A lot of times, things like tobacco or heavily polluting industries were avoided in those kinds of portfolios. So anyway, I kind of took it upon myself to learn about this area of investing. Became the go-to guy, I guess you would say, at Morningstar about all this, partly because no one else was all that interested in it. And, fast forward to 2006, 2008, we have the financial crisis, and we have just what I think is a growing concern among not only investors, but people in general about sustainability issues, right? And so we started using that term sustainability to describe this way of investing. It evolved over time because in 2006, the UN convened a group of asset managers and wealth managers from around the globe to talk to them about how they could start impacting sustainable development and start to sort of change the course of global capitalism away from this kind of idea that everything's only about narrow short-term profit for shareholders, and instead, saying maybe we can create appropriate returns for our shareholders, but at the same time, we can help address sustainability issues around the world. And so out of that convening sort of came the phrase ESG that you hear a lot used about today. And it really referred to a set of issues that environmental issues, social issues, corporate governance issues that investors really should be paying attention to. But prior to around that time, they really didn't have very much data or information to do it. But by 2006, it existed. In fact, we have a company at Morningstar that we own now called, that we acquired recently, called Sustainalytics. And Sustainalytics is involved in collecting ESG data on public companies so that investors can use that data to better assess the overall investment thesis of any company. And so a lot of it is about better understanding risk rather than just focusing on financial issues. We're now able to use ESG information to get a more holistic picture of everything a company is doing, from the way it's managing its environmental risks and impacts to the way it handles its workforce and the kinds of human resources and benefits that the fund or the company offers, to its oversight of its supply chain, labor in its supply chain, and how and the environmental impact of its supply chain. Things like that are now part and parcel of a full investment analysis. And the thought in 2006 was that if we could get asset managers and investors to focus on ESG issues alongside all the other financial issues and considerations that they use when they make an investment, then the overall impact of that would be that public companies would pay more attention to these ESG issues, and capitalism would sort of evolve to something that was more concerned about its impact on people and planet than it was before that.
That's awesome. And it's interesting to see, because you're talking about there was this wave back in the day where you said nobody cared. You were one of the first people that actually care about getting into this space and saying, okay, these are some of the areas that matter, right? And you said it, and you used that word like, oh, these investors should care about this stuff, but they have a tendency to prioritize profits over environmental or social impact, right? But as an ESG, which is an environmental social criteria, right? What are the couple, you kind of rattle off a couple of them, but in terms of like, what is it kind of broad stroking? What are the criterias that you're looking for to say, okay, this ticks the bucket of something that they could, beyond just, oh, this is a highly profitable business. If I put $1 in, $10 come out. That makes a lot of sense from an investment perspective. And so that's that. But in terms of the environmental, so social sustainability side of things, what are the criterias that that investors are looking for, or they should be looking for?
Yeah, well, it's a much more complex question than you might think, but I'll try to kind of break it down here.
Sure.
First of all, think about ESG issues as a set of issues that any public company might face that could be either are already or could become financially material for that company. So it does relate back to the profitability of a company, because what we were finding, what sort of was happening prior to the existence of so much ESG information was that you just didn't really know what's a company doing environmentally, what kind of impacts is a company and an industry having on the environment and now climate. There's no way to really assess that, to compare, contrast companies, to compare and contrast industries, to look at what are the material ESG issues industry by industry. So it varies by industry. In some industries, heavier, more in the like industrial sector and the basic materials sector and the energy sector, utilities, obviously environmental issues, climate related emissions, carbon emissions, things like that are key material issues, as well as other environmental issues and supply chain. But it varies industry by industry. So you can look at that. There's issues like, what industries are heavy users of natural resources. That's, what industries are very dependent on their supply chain, and in particular, the kinds of practices that that are extant in their supply chain. this could have a major impact. It also could become a major liability if some plant in a developing country that's a major supplier of a company, like a Walmart or a major clothing retailer or something like that is hiring and using child labor, or there's terrible work conditions and there's a fire or tragedy. These kinds of things can impact a company's bottom line kind of out of the blue before we had ESG information to better assess those risks. So it all starts out very practical, as a very practical thing for investors, professional investors, the kind of investors that we sort of hire, our asset managers, to run our money, to invest our money for us, are using ESG to better understand risk, and in some cases opportunities that might be out there that they just didn't really have much insight into before all this ESG information was available. And the thought was, again, going back to the UN in 2006 and this convening, the thought was that, well, we're encouraging companies to address these kinds of issues that will have positive, broader impact, because we're showing them how it can affect the risk of those companies, what kinds of risk it could pose to their profits and to their investors. And to asset managers, that convening was saying, you need to pay attention to these issues, not just the standard financial ones, because it's not fiduciarily, it's not part of your fiduciary responsibility if you're ignoring the potential ESG risks of investments. So that's that whole side of it. And that's a part of it that I think all investors should, understand, that ESG investing is providing a more holistic view for your investments, and helping you take into account ESG risks and opportunities that companies have, although to play kind of to the bottom line, right? You want to, it's better to and more profitable if you're able to deal with these material ESG risks. But in addition to that, what we're seeing, and it's kind of developed more recently, and I think there's a couple of reasons for it that we can get into, but there's also this component of sustainable investing where you want to focus more on broader impact. So when we're assessing companies, it's not just on ESG and how ESG might help us understand risks and opportunities for a company's ability to make profits and deliver returns to investors, but also what is the broader societal and planetary and climate impact that a company has, and can we as investors help them mitigate that impact, and even beyond that, how can investors direct capital to companies that are creating climate solutions and products and services that are going to help lead us into a more sustainable economy.
Yeah. So when you're talking about that, you've mentioned the UN here a couple times, and you're talking about the UN has, say, sustainable goals, right? So clean water, the climate, education for everybody, right? Are you primarily looking at some of their sustainable goals? Is it 19 sustainable goals? I believe it is.
17.
17.
Don't know how they came up with 7. I'm just going to imagine the negotiations over the sustainable development goals. No, we must have, I thought of another one. Now we're up to 17, but yes. So more recently, the UN has adopted a set of 17 sustainable development goals. We call those SDGs for short. So you've got ESG and SDGs, and they were not conceived necessarily to be a framework for investors to use, but more broadly, kind of an agenda for governments and NGOs and sort of for the world as a whole to kind of think of, here are the areas that we need to, work on and improve on in order to bring about sustainable development in the world by 2030. Impact investors have started using, though, the SDGs as a framework for evaluating the impact of their investments. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of public companies are taking that cue from investors and themselves are thinking more than ever they have in the past about, what is the impact of our company, not only our products and services, but our management policies, our environmental impacts. I mean, so many of these public companies are huge entities that that operate in dozens and dozens of locations and employ hundreds of thousands of people. So it's both of those elements. And so the SDGs are ways to help both investors and public companies better understand their impact and to help I think try to focus capital on in areas that are going to have a bigger impact on sustainable development.
Mm. And one of the things you brought up was around climate change, and so what have you seen in the areas of is that the biggest need of the times? Looking at what people can do around solutions around climate change, or is there other sustainable goals that you think is a higher priority to focus on?
Well, for investors, I think climate is probably the biggest. Yes. Other sustainable development goals are crucial and important. I mean, there's goals related to how we use water and other natural resources, which are clearly relevant. There's a whole lot of goals that are related to, ending poverty and improving inequality and those sorts of things as well. So lots of admirable goals. But I think as they relate to investing, that certainly climate goals are, maybe first among equals right now. Yeah. And one of the things that we're seeing that's happening in the kind of sustainable investment space is that companies are increasingly, I mean, it's been kind of amazing just in the past year or so, and in response to the last climate meeting in Scotland last November, a lot of companies are making net zero commitments, and a lot of asset managers are making net zero commitments. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that they're saying, they're making the claim that their operations and the impact of the use of their products and services will be net zero carbon emissions by 2050, as per the goals of the Paris Agreement. And on an interim basis, although this is a much more difficult thing to commit to reduce their carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. So there's a lot of commitments being made. Asset managers are making the commitments, and public companies are making the commitments. It's very interesting, like, how is it going to actually happen? A lot of public companies kind of have no idea exactly how they're going to do it. I think it's important. So it's easy to go, greenwashing, this is a terrible, well, this is not good. But I think it is a positive right now, because you got to get yourself out there to make the commitment in order to really press yourself to follow through on it, And so who's going to help public companies follow through on it? Well, eventually, hopefully, policymakers will, but how can we really count on that? Policymakers tend to be, politicians, especially in, democratic regimes, tend to be pretty short-term focused, and it's very difficult, as we can see in the United States, to get real action done on climate. So who's going to try to hold companies to their net zero commitments and keep them moving towards them? It's going to be sustainable investors. And so or if you think about asset managers as being those like, well, we're making commitments for net zero in our portfolios by 2050. What does that mean? It means, well, we're going to be investing only in companies that themselves are achieving net zero. How are we going to do that? Well, in the meantime, we're going to press those companies to continue to, elaborate on their commitments, to figure out this existential problem of how to reduce their carbon emissions to net zero. So I think it's a great issue to to help all of us understand the like crucial role that investing in general will play in this, but sustainable investing is that, that part of the broader investment context that's really focused on this.
Got it. So if one of the best ways to motivate these companies is to say this is where the investment dollars are focusing on, because this is what we're going to vote with our dollar, right? Whether it's buying products or whether it's investing in companies, but making sure that we say, okay, these are our standards and this is what the companies will then follow, because the money is the one that's going to be supporting it. And in that vein of what we're talking about, right, with that investment, like what have you seen as common trends of trying to tackle this climate change or patterns? Have you seen a lot of companies in the space popping up around AI or the metaverse or NFTs? Yeah, insert the thing that you want to insert. What have you seen as common patterns and companies trying to say, this is what we stand for, and this is the new technology we're using to try to affect change?
Well, to some degree, all of those things are of interest to companies that are trying to figure this out. I mean, I think you got to separate it into two broad types of companies. One is just companies who are, making products and services that don't directly have really anything to do with, solving the problems of climate change or making us more resilient against the effects of climate change, but they're just companies that are doing business. They're humongous entities, and they need to reduce their emissions because they're big emitters, and so they've got to figure out how to do it. They've got to, I think a lot of that is them pursuing commitments and creating the demand for renewable energy as just a big and pretty easy to understand, approach. And also then just, dealing with, it depends on the company and kind of the products and services that they use, but, being more and more energy efficient in the way that you make products and the way that they're used is crucially important. The other thing is that I mentioned supply chains earlier, and the larger the company and the bigger its supply chain, the more it can drive change throughout its supply chain. It's funny that partly because Walmart, partly because of its not great history of labor relations, has often been seen as kind of a negative for sustainable investors, or back in the day, right, when I talked about SRI back, and not having a lot of real data, but just kind of more impressionistic views. Walmart wasn't considered to be a very good actor, I guess I would say, among responsible investors. But today, Walmart and their environmental sustainability policies are extremely influential because of its supply chain and their influence over their supply chain. I mean, if you want to do business with Walmart, you have to meet a set of environmental standards that are pretty stiff. So that's a way that a lot of big companies are making a greater impact as well. But then you've got this other type of company, and those are the ones that are like making that are going to be creating the solutions really to to climate resilience and what we're going to do how we're going to operate a low carbon economy. And the way that I think investors can help a lot with that is to invest in those kind of companies, and it's been difficult to do because the way that we're typically told as investors how to allocate our assets. There's no established allocation for climate solutions, let's just call them. That's considered a thematic investment that in a well allocated portfolio that maybe a typical individual has, or many institutional investors would have as well. That's considered kind of a secondary or kind of a satellite investment around all your other investments. And so it's kind of unclear to investors how to invest and how much to invest in climate solutions. That's something that the asset management industry really almost literally as we speak, is trying to better address. And so just in the last year or so, we've seen really dozens of funds, for instance, that would be available public, to retail investors, individual investors, that focus on climate solutions and really are trying to drive more capital to, these companies that are really creating products and services that will make a key difference in our ability to transition. Also, private investments, private equity. That's the province of institutional investors and pretty and high net worth individual investors, but that's also an area where there's an increased focus on identifying climate solutions, meaning companies that are making the products and that will help us make the transition to a low carbon economy and getting the capital to them.
Nice. And with the climate solutions startups or companies that are really going along this path, do you want to talk about have you seen any technology that has you be hopeful for the future for some of these climate solutions? Is there anything that you've seen that have been innovative that have come out that make you go, oh wow, that gives me something to really say, if this technology was wider spread, we could have a drastic impact on us?
I think, I'd almost like to answer almost the opposite, that like the one major, the one major
I want
technology.
a magic pill. Give me a magic pill.
Right.
Don't tell me diet and exercise for climate change. I want to.
Well, that's the thing. So there's this faith in technology, right? That is out there. I mean, the technology is ultimately gonna solve the issue, right? And maybe it will. The one that I get concerned about being overhyped is carbon capture technology. Now, I'm not a sort of climate solutions expert from a science standpoint, but everything that I've read about it says that it's very, very expensive and just unlikely to be the kind of solution that we think it is. So carbon capture, I think, on balance, it's still worth looking into, but I'm concerned about like putting eggs in that basket with this kind of underlying faith in technology, and that we'll figure out a way to like inject all that carbon somehow deep down underneath. And I think that most of the solutions are a bit more prosaic. They're things like reforestation and reform of agriculture, and certainly ongoing development of renewable energy at levels that are taking off already, but are being sort of countered to some degree by continued fossil fuel investment. Electric vehicles, battery technology is going to be extremely important. But a lot of it is, like I said, it's pretty prosaic. A lot of it is like, how do we get EV charging stations, networked in a way that will really unleash consumer demand for electric vehicles? How do we scale up renewable energy, utilities to continue the transition away from fossil fuels?
That makes sense. So then what you're saying is, it makes sense. Carbon capture, one of the concerns being is that you can capture it and then you can go and resell it and then just go burn it and kind of complete that cycle of carbon capture. But what you're saying is like, what are some of these, what are the cornerstone problems that if we could fix maybe a network or an infrastructure, say network or infrastructure of the cars, the charging stations, the batteries, something that would allow us to make these green solutions more ubiquitous, something that allows us to kind of spread this across, would be of great benefit. If these are some of the things that you're talking about, looking at reforestation, right, which is, it's one of the natural ways that we could have for climate change. What do you think what makes for a good investment from a environmental, social criteria standpoint, what is something that would, I'm looking for, what are common pitfalls that people face trying to raise investment for this, and what are things that actually make for real good investments in this space?
Well, I think a couple of things. If somebody's looking at this from from the perspective of an investor and say an individual investor, um, you're an investor not in many ways not by choice. I mean, a lot of those of us that are fortunate enough to have money to invest, it's not just play money, right? It's money that you need to help you reach your financial goals in life. And really for most even large institutional investors, that's what they need to do as well. They need to kind of create investment returns that are going to help them meet their financial goals kind of in perpetuity. So the first thing is that you cannot concede returns, right? You can't say, well, I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart, because you're not going to reach your financial goals as an investor if you do that. So that's kind of problem number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then problem number two is like, well, how do I assess and evaluate how impactful any given investment that I make, especially as an individual investor, actually has? What kind of difference does it make? And so those are like the problems. I think with the more pointed, your question was a little bit more maybe aimed this way, is like, how do you assess what a good like investment in carbon or in climate solutions would be?
Mm-hmm.
And that is like, well, we have a number of asset managers out there that now are offering investment products to address climate solutions, and you need to kind of figure out where they're coming from, what their objectives are, and we'll see how they do. A lot of this stuff is kind of early stages as far as proof of concept as an investment. So we'll have to see. I think it's prudent if someone is interested, concerned, wants to do something about climate change through their investments, that investing a sleeve of their portfolio in climate solutions is a good idea. But an even maybe better idea is to make sure that your entire portfolio is kind of activated towards sustainable investing. So that means all of your just broad-based exposure to large cap companies in the US and maybe for non-US, and
Mm-hmm.
your bond exposure and things like that are focused around general sustainability principles. Because the key thing that you can accomplish with that is that you're adding your 2 cents worth, hopefully more than that, but you're adding your 2 cents worth to the shareholder base of all these companies who are getting this message. It's a signaling device. They're getting this message that investors are concerned about this, and they want us to do our part to address it.
Got it. So it's voting with the dollars, but one of the things that you said, the biggest issue is you can't concede returns, which basically means it needs to be profitable. It's got to be able to make money for the investor at the end of the day. Otherwise, it's not sustainable for them to continue their investment.
Right.
So is this a profitable investment, and does this have an impact in the area that matters? And how will the dollars that I invest be spent in a way that actually I can know with certainty that my investment is making some sort of impact, right? Both to myself financially and to society at large. So when people are looking at that with the criteria, you have this checklist of criteria that you go at? Because I know there's a bunch of different sectors. So depending on the business, right? If they're a product business and they've got physical goods, that's one kind. If they're an online digital informational product, that's a different kinds of assets, right? So you have criteria that allow people to kind of review based upon those categories on whether or not, and based upon that industry, if this company is technically one that's doing its part in this, because I imagine it would be different for a digital product as it would be for a physical product.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And literally we have, I mean, really on the risk and opportunity side, we're a little more advanced on that than on the impact side. But generally speaking, yes, think of it in terms of industry by industry. What are the particular material ESG risks that this industry faces? What opportunities does it have in terms of sustainability solutions that this industry might create? And then on broader impact, what are the positive and or negative externalities that are created from this industry and from major companies that are operating within this industry? And that kind of criteria, it all kind of it ends up all going hand in hand, because what's happening today is that more and more people, I guess I would strip it down almost to this, and that is that more and more people today are concerned about sustainability. And however you define it, it's one of these terms that's maybe not that precisely defined or even maybe definable, but I think there's kind of this sustainability ethos that a lot of people have today, which is about making decisions in ways that aren't just about my own selfish interest, that they take into account other affected stakeholders. They take into effect the future stakeholders. They take into effect the planet. Let's make decisions this way that are long term, that take into account an extended sphere of affected parties, right? Rather than I'm only going to make short-term decisions in my own self-interest. And so I think a lot of people, particularly, I mean, I notice that younger people, you look at universities today and there's all these sustainability programs that are out there. And, I know at Morningstar, I mean, it seems like every single person that we hire that's recently graduated from college is interested in sustainability and sustainable investing, as opposed to sort of traditional investing. So I mean, I take that as a really positive thing. But when you think about it, these folks are making, they want to make decisions with a sustainability lens on those decisions, whether it's as consumers, whether it's as in their careers, deciding how they're going to spend their careers, what their lifestyle is, politically. So it only makes sense that they also are going to want to do that as investors. So it's just kind of this broad, I think, sustainability ethos. And it also then from an investment standpoint, you've got all these companies out there who they're looking at the same things. They're saying, our customers want us to be more sustainable. Our workforce, I mean, in order for us to attract a talented and dedicated workforce that likes working here, they want us to be more sustainable. Now, geez, we used to think that investors were the last holdout, but now we see that our investment base seems to have an increasing number of sustainable investors in it. Or if it doesn't, we're getting, complaints about, the fact that, from investors that, we can't invest in you because you have these, terrible record on how you manage your ESG risks or something like that. So, it's all interrelated. And we're seeing today, just in the last, I would say 2 years, companies have a huge amount of ESG initiatives going on. Companies that you would think, really, this company is concerned about sustainability. I mean, every single one. I would challenge anyone to go out and look at, say, companies in the S&P 500 and find a company that could care less about sustainability and ESG today. It just isn't. There aren't any. And it's amazing because 5 years ago, that was not the case. 5 years ago, I'd have companies calling me and saying, wait, what does ESG stand for exactly? What's going on here? So it's been a real sea change, and we'll see. I mean, I'm not sure that we could point to the overall performance of capitalism and say, oh, it's doing so much better now, or we now have sustainable capitalism. It's early days, but it's definitely I think a positive trend.
So the interest is there, and it's kind of the sign of the times. I mean, the younger generations are trying to find something that has more depth and more meaning. I mean, we had this thing, the Great Recession, resignation, where people are kind of resigning, trying to find something that has more meaning and more impact. But it seems like we're trying to find that balance between, profit and purpose, and how does that all sync together, so that we can kind of have something that's more meaningful. If people wanted to educate themselves on, if companies want to educate themselves on, how to become more sustainable and what does it look like, and where to get started and all that stuff, do you have any recommendations for places, books to read, things to do?
Well, there's, if you're talking about an individual investor, for instance, I mean, I will tout what we do at Morningstar. We have on morningstar.com. We cover a lot of topics on sustainable investing, from kind of how-tos to more sophisticated topics. I have a blog on Medium called the ESG Advisor, that I try to make helpful on a regular basis. But there's a lot of information out there. It's almost too much. It's almost like you start wading into it and you might be thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get out from under all this information on it? So that's what I would suggest there. I mean, companies, I think it's really important for startup companies today to think about, like, what are the sustainability issues that we're going to face if we're going to be successful? How are we going to combine profit and purpose? There's some great books out there. One by Paul Pullman and Andrew Winston, that's just out, called something like Profit and Purpose. I can't. I'll think of it in a second. Paul Pullman.
Is it Courageous Companies?
It's called Net Positive.
Net Positive.
Right. And it's basically a book about, how you can, how a company can really, instead of saying net zero, there is a play on net zero carbon emissions, saying, let's move from net zero to how we can be net positive on, who we are as a company and our impact. It's a good read for anyone who's interested in this topic. On the other hand, there's a book out by David Gellis, who's a New York Times reporter, business reporter, called The Man Who Broke Capitalism, I think it's called. And it's about Jack Welch, who was who ran GE in the 90s and 2000s. And it's kind of an alternative. It's like saying, this is what's wrong with capitalism. This is shareholder primacy. This is, let's run everything in as ruthlessly, efficiently as possible, so that we can reward shareholders every single quarter and forget about how, our broader impact on society or on our workers or our customers. Let's just reward shareholders. And this is kind of what this whole sustainability, ethos is really countering today. We're getting ready. You sometimes hear the term stakeholder capitalism, and that's kind of what that refers to, as a evolution away from this shareholder primacy version of capitalism, very libertarian in kind of its basic views of how the way the economy should work and the way companies ought to work within them. They should be, everything's fair game as long as it's legal. To stakeholder capitalism and sustainability, which is all about profit and purpose, all about adding these this sustainability ethos onto your decision making, all about taking care of all stakeholders and figuring out how to embed this into your corporate strategy over the long term in a way that will be profitable, but it will also be net positive to people and planet.
Got it. Yeah, and I think the book you're looking at, because I Googled it here off to the side, it says The Man Who Broke Capitalism, How Jack Welch Gutted the Heartland and Crushed the Soul of Corporate America, and How to Undo His Legacy.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
that's
quite a that's quite a title. You can see why I didn't have it
Yeah,
memorized,
yeah,
but
yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I just want to call it out in case
yeah, yeah,
anybody looks for it. But looking at that from the perspective you said, this is something to be aware of. Whether it's startups or companies, they start to understand, okay, what is it that what are the values of that company, right? And how do they put procedures, SOPs, and things in place so that they can really stand behind what they believe in, right? And is now this is one book that would kind of give us some insights, but there's other ways that you could kind of dive in of how does a company start to identify what their values are and what things they can put in place for that. So if they're from a perspective of going, okay, we want to move in this direction, but we don't know how. What are those like 1, 2, 3 steps to make that happen?
Well, I think one thing is to keep purpose front and center always. What is the mission of this company, and what is its purpose? How are we going to help people and improve their lives? And I think a lot of companies have that as in the beginning. That it's what they want to do in the beginning, and profit is kind of, yeah, we want to make profit because we want to live. It's like we need the air to breathe, but that's not the purpose of our life, and but what can happen in the process of gathering capital, getting your investors together and all that, is that the focus can shift to how are you going to make money, how soon are you going to make money. We need to get to get this thing capitalized so we can get in and out of it. And so I think, again, here is where private equity investors play a crucial role, and that their view has to change as well. They need to become more sustainable investors. I wrote something about this a few months ago, and in looking at what's happening in that space, we're seeing that happen. We're seeing more private equity investors saying, yes, we get it. We can't only focus on, generating a profitable enterprise here. It needs to be sustainable from the beginning. It's easier than getting big and then trying to have to retrofit sustainability onto something that's not, been well practiced. So I think not losing sight of it and trying to even find of your purpose and trying to find investors, even if you have to go back and forth with them or try to attract investors, early stage investors who themselves understand this whole concept of sustainability, is really key.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is with the contradiction in infinite growth and sustainability. Right, there seems to be at odds with each other, that you want to be in to earn returns and earn a healthy return, but at the same time, if you're looking for sustainability is about finding an equilibrium in the environment or in society versus just domination of something, right? So how do those two coexist, and how would you say, because you talk about they have to shift whether they're PEs, private equities, or angels, or whatever it might be, they have to shift their mentality. They still want to return, but how does that, if they're looking for sustainability, what needs to shift for them?
Well, I think it's this question of it can't go on this way, right? The sort of idea of infinite growth, kind of depends on this notion, I guess, when you get all the way back to basics of unlimited resources. And sustainability is, I think, a recognition of limits, yes, and that if we continue to not recognize that in the way that we run businesses, then we'll get to a crisis way more quickly than maybe we otherwise would, or won't be able to avert crisis, which we're pretty close to that right now with climate, right? And so it's really like there's no choice, but to embed sustainability principles into business models, because you're, a company starting out today wants to, it wants to be operating and profitable and presumably contributing positively to society by 2050, when the entire world needs to be at net zero. I mean, there's almost, it's no choice. So you're looking ahead and it's hard. I mean, this idea of embedding sustainability into a business model, and this is a lot of what the Net Positive book is about, and it's about and a lot about what the Jack Welch book is sort of the opposite of. It's very hard. A lot of people don't really know how to do it. Right? We have all these sustainability sort of pioneers right now trying it, but the idea is that you have you're sort of going, in some ways you're going back to the way capitalism was practiced prior to the past 40 or 50 years, when it wasn't all about shareholder primacy. It was about things like developing your workers over the course of a career and paying attention to them. It was about being connected to communities. So it's not, some of these sustainability principles and things that I think are going to be required to have a healthy economy and to have healthy companies working within that, and profitable companies working within it. It's not, something that we need to create completely out of whole cloth, but something that, there were elements of before, even during a time when we didn't really recognize limits to growth. It was still just, a way of just a more kind of humane way to run companies. Right. And so elements of it were there. I think a lot of companies will be able to do this. A lot of them are making the transition literally as we speak, even though they're in the very early innings today.
It's almost like kind of remembering our sustainable roots as companies, right? That it's not about infinite growth; it's about finding some sort of equilibrium and balance. At the same time, we still need to make it a profitable business, but it's about remembering that there's more than just the gains, more than the capitalistic gains. There's something beyond that, because we kind of now need to. Sign of the times, 2050. Climate change and all that. You've put a lot of time. You've been kind of waving the flag of these, sustainable impact investments, or these ESCs. When you look at this and all the effort and you've been doing this for a long time now, what is your holy grail? Like, what is your flag that you hope to plant at the top of the mountain through all of this effort, all this time, all this promotions, all the things that you're doing to being this resource to people? Do you have a holy grail flag in the sand that you hope to achieve with all the effort that you do?
Well, I'd like to see more and more investors embrace sustainability and invest in ways that reflect their sustainability views that they have, because I think we're still early on that. There's a lot more money that could be invested this way, but people don't just immediately go out and change their investments when they hear about a new idea. They have to wait. It's going to take a while. So I think we're in the early stages. I would like to see it grow enormously, because I think it will usher in this idea of sustainable capitalism that we need to address issues like climate change, but also inequality and lots of other issues that the world faces. And it's possible that capitalism has created a lot of problems in the way it's been practiced in the 20th century, and in the 21st century, I think it needs to focus more on solutions, because right now I don't think that the countervailing powers like government and policymakers are necessarily up to the task. I think it's an all hands on deck situation. So I want to see it to continue to grow. It's under some attack right now from right-wing politicians in the US, from some traditionalist investors who, think, wow, we shouldn't be worried about these extra things. All we need to do is really focus on profit, maybe make no changes at all in what traditional investments like. And there's still a lot of money invested that way. So I think we still need to push forward to a time when everyone who would like to be invested in a sustainable way is actually invested that way, both in their personal accounts and in their retirement accounts and pension funds and all the ways that money's being invested on their behalf.
Mm. And got it. So really it's about kind of just expanding the awareness for investors to make investments and kind of shift their beliefs to match their dollar spend and say, okay, this is my belief. I want to invest in more sustainable goods, and this is doing to actually get them to take that action. If that's the goal around the awareness, like for you personally, what is the dragon? What is the thing that, in order for you to achieve that goal with getting these investors to take these brave steps forward, what is the dragon you need to overcome to make that possible?
Well, I think it's I think what we're seeing, here is it's a paradigm shift, away from the traditional way of investing and the focus on shareholder primacy to sustainability and stakeholder capitalism and that sort of thing. And people who have made their careers and reputation and money in an old paradigm are very very vociferous in their defense of that paradigm. And so right now I feel like my concern is that that's going to combine with into kind of jump over into the political sphere and join forces with politicians who are climate deniers, essentially, and who are supporters of continued fossil fuel exploration and use, and that those forces have been very powerful over the last century, and they're not gonna give up their power and influence without a fight. Yeah. And so that's the dragon that needs to be slayed is that of fossil fuel interests and the politicians that work for them.
It makes me think of what I was saying. It's difficult to make a man understand something that his paycheck doesn't allow him to understand. Yeah. So you're talking about, a lot of it's the people that are having monetary benefits from these fossil fuels and these other things that kind of go, and you have this entrenched beliefs versus the sustainable goals. That's awesome, and it makes a ton of sense around that. With all that being said, is there any like last pieces of advice you would give to either investors or to business builders in this space for them to be able to kind of take action to move forward?
So I think one of the things I want to say, I guess, about investors and why this is a good idea for investors beyond the impact and the need to accomplish all these things is a lot of times you'll hear traditionalist investors say to people, especially, individuals, they'll say, don't risk this. Sometimes these funds cost you more money, or sometimes, ultimately they're not going to return as well as a traditional investment. And I think the kicker for this is that not only are you investing in ways that will help make a difference, and we do need to be clear about one thing. When we talk about sustainable investments, they're investments first. They're not a way it's not social activism per se. It doesn't mean they don't have impact, because we've talked about the kind of impact they can have, but it's basically an investment. And so as an investor, you're basically purchasing, when you purchase a fund or an ETF, you're purchasing an investment product. And you've decided that you want the sustainable version of this investment product, right? What does an investment product bring you? It brings you the kind of utilitarian benefit of investment returns. You need those returns in order to reach your financial goals. But a sustainable investment to someone that cares about these things, it's also bringing them positive, what I would call expressive benefits and emotional benefits. By investing sustainable, it expresses who you are, and it makes you feel good about yourself and about the decisions that you make in your life. So those are important, and they might seem kind of intangible, that they're important benefits that you get from sustainable investing as a person. And what would be the import of that? Well, I think that it helps sustainable investors be better investors over the long run, stay the course during a bear market, for instance, when a lot of investors go, oh, I have no connection with these investments, they're losing money, I'm out.
Pull.
That doesn't help you over the long term, typically, to try to time the market. Sustainable investors have not taken as much money out proportionally from their investments this year as investors overall have. Sustainable investing flows into funds have held up better. And I think the reason why is because as an investor, it helps you because you're connected with your investments. You understand that they have a meaning beyond just the utilitarian benefit of your own profits. And you hold on to that, and you don't want to just ditch them at the first sign of problems. So I think it not only helps people and planet, it actually helps sustainable investors be better long-term oriented investors.
That's awesome. Yeah, because it creates a meaning and a connection beyond just the profit. You're still there for the profit, but what it is it allows you to, do you believe in it in the long term versus that short-sighted, the stock dipped or whatever happened, so I'm going to bounce out. And so it makes you actually in it for the long haul, which ultimately gives you better returns. So that's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you tell them how to get a hold of you?
The only other thing that we haven't specifically talked about that I do think is important to all this is this, what is the mechanism by which, when we signal as sustainable investors, we're signaling to companies, deal with your ESG issues, think about your impact. But is there any other kind of mechanism that this operates through? And there's one, what I call active ownership or shareholder engagement. And what's happening is that sustainable investors, mainly through their asset managers, sometimes through large institutional investors, are actively and directly engaging with companies about these issues. And when companies might decide, well, interesting idea, but we're not going to do it, you can propose shareholder resolutions at company meetings, and shareholders can vote on these. And we've had, over the last several years, record numbers of shareholder resolutions related to ESG issues that have been supported in greater numbers than ever by shareholders who vote on them. And so that creates a very direct mechanism, and that's what for change. And when you invest in a sustainable fund or ETF, many of them, most of them, have active shareholder engagement and proxy voting programs that really try to exert this influence directly on companies. And I think that's a really important thing. It certainly resonates with investors when they hear about it, but a lot of times, we spent this hour, we didn't get to that topic, but I should have raised it earlier. But I think that's a great last thing to think of. That's one of the things that you're doing when you're investing in a sustainable fund, is you're lending your voice to that direct engagement efforts and the proxy voting that could result in favor of ESG resolutions that companies then have to address in some way.
That makes sense. Yeah. So bubbling it up from the shareholders' perspective to say, okay, this is a resolution for something that we need to tackle. And so by investing in it, you can kind of weigh in on that. And whether it's you're doing the proxy votings or whatever it might be, to be able to say, these are the critical issues that we should talk about and we should vote on because this matters. Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome. Great. And Jon, if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to find out more about what you do and the areas that you can help them, how would they do that?
Well, so different ways. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a Twitter handle at Jon F. Hale. and Medium blog, the ESG Advisor. And I also write about once a week on Morningstar.com. So quite a few ways.
Yeah, that's how I found you. You had a bunch of great content. I was like, oh, okay, I got to have this guy on and share
Yeah.
some of the messages. So thank you so much, Jon. I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been excellent talking with you. Thank you for sharing the lessons, stories, and insights. I appreciate your time. Have a blessed and beautiful day, and I'll see you on the other side.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Take care now. All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening.